we had the best time. I think it was actually luxury. This gorgeous old cottage that was put together decades and decades ago, that looks so tiny in the middle of this huge valley that is just rolling plains, but the landscape itself is extraordinary. And so while we both had put in proposals of what we do, it was like all of a sudden completely irrelevant, because there were more things. The valley simply asserted itself and it owned you. And so it told you what it wanted rather than us imposing something on the valley. And I think that's what you have to do in any kind of residency. A friend of mine emailed me before I left and said, don't forget the 3 R's of residency, which is retreat, reflect, rejoice. And you can't help but do anything but that at Nanaji. It's an extraordinary place. The history there just seeps up out of the ground at you. Both the Aboriginal and the settler experiences are quite strong in that place. The bird song is unbelievable. It's just extraordinary. It's the most wonderful experience. So you just spend a lot of time listening. And Sharon and I would sit on the front veranda, like at 7 with breakfast. And at 10:30 we were still there listening. It just brings you in and you can't escape it and you don't want to. So if you're a person who's a control freak, don't go. You have to allow yourself to be controlled by the place. And so everything that is extraordinary about the place, I hope we've managed to translate into work that we've done. So I, for example, went with the idea of researching and trying to replicate the very strong but very delicate bird nets and moth nets that we use traditionally by Ngunnawal people. And while I did collect fibres from different plants and have used them in these 3 works in particular, it almost seemed like I needed more time than I had to experiment with the net weaves to do justice to them, because they're so fine and so elegant and so beautiful. So maybe next year you might see those. And maybe the year after you might see them in glass, if I can find a way to translate them into glass, which would be an enormous challenge, I suspect. But it also meant that I came away feeling that it took me back to real basics. If you're in a place like this, as traditional people have been to live in harmony with that place, and you need to express that from deep within, how do you do that with the materials at hand? So I collected things, as you'll see in the 2 installations on Red Earth, I collected things like bone and rock and grasses that I intend to use as drawing instruments, because the forms and shapes of those simply speak the place. So it doesn't matter whether I grind up ochres or charcoal or use inks or acrylics or whatever I use with them, the marks they will make cannot help but replicate the sense of that place and the strength of that place. And so those are in progress, and you'll see them probably in another year's time. But it's also something, because the place is unhurried, what is expressed from the place also has to be unhurried. It has to have its own time to evolve. And so that's what's happening. So this residency has got me started on an enormous journey, I think, for a very long time. And it will keep bearing fruit. So I've been impressed by, I suppose, the rawness of some things. You know, we watched the wild dogs hunting kangaroos. They didn't have a hope of catching the kangaroos anyway. They're too fast and they're too smart. But things like bones, you know, these are part of the very essence of the place. It's part of the essence of those cycles of survival and life and death. And so to be able to do more with those bones, I think, is something that I would like to do. I also collected some sticks which we cast with the help of Spike Dean at the Glassworks, because I'm not really a caster and she gave me a lot of help. So casting in Blackwood's crystal glass, some of those sticks, and they actually have ash embedded in them. So it's another way of speaking to the recent bushfires and things that have happened. So the two installations one has sticks, and they both have charcoal sticks in there that were burnt sticks. And they also have the black cast glass elements of other vegetation, so that were collected and cast in glass. So while I have done casting before, I've never really taken to it, but some things that I collected just said the only way they can be expressed is in cast glass. So you just have to do that. Even if it's a bit agonising at times. We had lots of trials and tribulations with dry out kilns and everything else, but those pieces are here. And it's reconnected me also with the weaving tradition. My aunties were weavers. And while I've played with it over time, it's always been put to the background, I suppose, while I'm busy with glass and other things. So it gave me the chance to come back to those basics. Okay, this is the place where, I'm collecting the reeds and the rushes and the grasses. This is the place that I can, put them on the fire pit and boil them up. And this is where I can practice twining them into a proper cord, with the aim of this is the technique that will be used to make the moth nets and bird nets. So in that sense, it's kind of regrounded me in my heritage as well. So it's been an amazing time, and I thank Craft ACT for the opportunity, because it's given me that much more.
Questions to the end?
Well, I'm glad Jenny went first. I'll give the prequel. I'll go through why in the world I have thylacines in this little exhibition, because obviously there's no thylacines here on mainland. And they were recorded up until the 1840s, last in the Grampians, from my research that I did. And so while I was really wanted this residency, I did a lot of research. And at the time, I was really wanting to do birds. That was my main focus. And I went to the Sydney Museum and looked at their specimens, their wet specimens, the ones in jars. And I went to the Melbourne Museum, and I was lucky to spend a couple of days there. And that then, talking with the curator there, then I got the language of what I needed, because then we were heading off overseas. I got to London, to the British Museum, the Natural History Museum, Grant Street Museum, which was full of old jars of animals, and the Trim Museum, which is out of London, and it's where the bird collection for the Natural History Museum is, and that has a whole weird and wonderful history in itself. And then we were in Europe and the Netherlands, and I had to hand it in by the time I got to the Netherlands. And then we had 4 months travelling around Europe, Northern Europe. And in most museums where I was looking at bird collections, there would be a thylacine with glassy eyes staring. And these poor thylacines in so many museums, Northern Ireland, Scotland. The only place there wasn't one was in Estonia, in their Natural History Museum. And while we were waiting for us to take on at first the bushfires, so we couldn't go in March, and then COVID struck, and we waited and waited for the National Museum to say, yep, we'll get ahead, and we made time. I lost confidence in the birds, and I thought, oh, those thylacines. And our theme was the Anthropocene, and I kept thinking, and I was looking at the National Museum online, their collection of thylacines, and there was a skin from a northwest area of Tasmania, Mount Zion. And that's where my family came from, and they were miners there. And so then everything really fell into place for me, mining and Anthropocene, and I was so excited and started making work immediately, and we only had a very limited time at the National Museum. And I was looking at all their collection of jars, a specific collection which was the Mackenzie collection, and that's the Genesis collection of the National Museum, and it's a science collection from the Anatomy, Institute of Anatomy. So it's an unusual collection because it's a historical social history museum. So I got a bit confused, and so straight away I started making work. But then when I got to Namadgi, it all evaporated. And the birds were just amazing. It must have been like spring at that time up in the hills. The kangaroos in their hundreds were mating and boxing and playing around. But in the morning the birds were just so beautiful. And I would go off on walks because I recorded some bird song at 6 in the morning. And there was a particular corner on the Gudgeonby residence down near the road, and that was across the road from where it had all been burnt out. And the noise of birds at 6 in the morning were just so, I couldn't even tell what birds they were. There were just so many birds and so much song. It was just brilliant. But then the dogs started appearing. The first night we were there, we heard them howling, and then the next night I think there were 3 that had come down. You could watch them. Then there were 5, and I took off up past Gudgeonby Homestead up to the top, and there were 5 chasing kangaroos, and I was terrified because I was by myself, and even though the rangers had said, oh, that's fine, they'll be fine. Rangers tend to be in cars with other people, and I thought, So I picked up some stones and I walked along, and then I thought, I'm just going to bob below the grass line so they can't see me. And I marched back to the cottage, and I was exhausted. And then, I would listen in the morning if I could hear anything. One morning I took off, had a look, and it's a big U-shaped walk I would do. And I saw 2 of them, a black and a tan, on the other side. I thought, oh, okay, there's a creek there. I'll just go back home. I don't really need to record today. And then on the 3rd last day, doing my usual big loop, I thought, wow, that kangaroo went past fast. And thought, oh no. And 2 dogs were chasing it. And I thought, okay, they're heading that way. Then a black one came and saw me and started barking, and then 2 more came along, and I thought, oh, okay. So they all grouped together, and they were howling and barking, and then they sort of took off, but one red one just went up and around and came behind me, and it started to bark, but I thought, okay, you're not being quiet, I know you're there, so I'll just keep going. But I did get the stone again. And I marched so quickly, it was about 2 kilometres to go. and he just kept barking and followed me all the way almost to the back, to the cottage. So I'm glad it happened right at the end there. But how to encapsulate that fear is really, really difficult. And it took a while. And so I made some pieces that were too late to be in the exhibition. And they are. So using the little glasses case, so it's about optical and seeing and the usual hand stitching that I've been doing in the last few years. So these little dogs just sit within there, and I can just close them up at any time. I have control of the situation.
Pass them around.
Yeah, sure.
They're gorgeous. They're stunning. I've got my own of them.
And then there's a little black one as well. Just these dogs that just terrify me. So they had to sort of become the pseudo-thylacines in a way. But because we've had such a quick turnaround, I have come with just a huge stack of work to be done still. There's just so much that you could take from that place. And I've been out to Redicut a couple of times, and yeah, to me, just going further down, yeah, it's just a farm, just yeah. But when you're there for so long, and you just, as Jenny said, it takes hold of you, and you slow down, and you really listen and work with the pulse of the land. It changes the way, I went with so many sort of preconceptions of what I was going to do, how it was going to turn out, but I've just had to relax and go with how it is. So all that, it was a great process to go through all that research for it, because in actual fact it's helped me when I've been applying for other things now. I have such a strong idea about where I'm going, and the work I did with that has been incredibly useful. So even though I changed tack, it's been great.